All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our community action panel. On a day like today, where it's absolutely miserable outside, it is not a shock that there are far more people on Zoom than there are in person. So let's make sure that our folks on Zoom can hear us. So there's our agenda for today. These are our illustrious speakers that I'm not going to introduce you. I'm going to have you. But first of all, here we go. All right. So today our topic is, what does it mean to be an academic and an activist? That's me, Stephanie Vidaillet at Gelderloos. I teach on the Flint campus in the Department of Language and Communication. I'm also the faculty advisor for LUNA, our Latino student organization, my own little group of activists. And I'm really happy to be here today. As you can see on the screen, it has a little, somebody's writing, activism is and they're not finished. So I wanted to start out the conversation by maybe asking some people in the audience, how would you finish that? Activism is a what? Okay, awesome. So I was trying to get some input from the audience before we got started to see if anybody could help me finish this little note on the screen. Activism is a blank. So how would you finish that? We had activism is an act. Activism is a verb. I said activism might be a privilege. If anybody wants to share, maybe throw it in the chat. All right, what do you guys have for activism while we figure this out? Activism is a blank. What? Oh, for sure.
Activism is a lot of work. Just being real. So, anyone else? Yeah.
It's ongoing, like it doesn't stop. It's a skill, and it's a muscle you gotta build.
And I would just say that it's a responsibility, moral imperative.
Yeah, I think they were going to write duty. So kind of a similar thing, right? Like activism is a duty. Okay, so here's our panel. We are really happy to have panelists from all three campuses with us today. And instead of me introducing them, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and kind of answer a question to get us started. All right, please. Next slide. I'm going to hand this to you. So, Bill, I would like you to introduce yourself and then please share about a moment in your life that made you want to engage in community action. It could be an event that was like a catalyst for your ideas of becoming active, or it could just be one particular thing that you got active about. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Finn Bell. Thanks for your patience with all of our technological difficulties. I use he, him pronouns. I'm an assistant professor of human services at University of Michigan, Dearborn. And one moment that really catalyzed things for me, so I grew up in the city of St. Louis, which is a very obviously structurally racist city. So I think sometimes it's hard for me to think about a single moment because as a young person, that was sort of what I and everyone else could see. But I definitely remember a moment of asking my mom about like the clear disparities that I saw. We were driving home from the grocery store, and we saw an older Black woman who was waiting for the bus, also coming from the grocery store with a lot of groceries. And I just remember asking my mom, who was is a social worker, why do all the white people have cars and all the Black people take the bus? And, she was just kind of like, well, that's just kind of how things are, right? And I remember how unsatisfying that answer was to me then, how unsatisfying that answer is to me now. And, as a kid, I remember having like a lump in my throat and feeling like there was something screaming in my chest of like, this can't just be how things are. And I think my life since then has been very much, in different ways, but trying to come up with a better sort of response and a better like way of being in the world. So yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Birchok. He, him, his are my pronouns, and I am associate professor of anthropology on the Flint campus. I should probably also say here, I'm the president of the UMF AFT AUP, so the Union for Tenure Track Faculty that was founded 2 years ago. We were recognized, and we're now on our first contract. I could pick a couple of different moments, but I'm going to focus on one. And there are a couple people at this table who actually were a part of this. Shout out to Stephanie in particular. Before I got involved in the union activism, I was involved in a movement called One University, which was a movement that it was still around in certain respects. That really looked at the economic and funding disparities between U of M's 3 campuses in terms of how that affects students, how that affects faculty, how that affects community. That was a particularly powerful movement for me for several reasons. One was that I got involved in that shortly after I started the tenure track job in Flint. My degree is from Ann Arbor and I live in Ann Arbor. So there was this kind of like, for me, it was serendipitous, right? Like I had a lot of local knowledge. I wasn't intimidated by Ann Arbor and the way that some can be. So there was a bit of a serendipity there, like just kind of luck. And I think that says something about activism. Like there's often like, it's about like things coming together. But also the movement itself was this movement that was like so authentically about students and staff and faculty and community, right? Like both kind of accidentally and because we designed it that way. And I've always found that I find my activism to be most authentic and most effective when it's about like bringing interests together, right? When it's not about me and it's not about you, it's about a we. And that was a moment where that really crystallized, I think. And so when I think about my current trajectory, like the One University and the way One U came together, like really kind of set me there. So, yeah.
Hi, I'm Candace Christensen, pronouns they, them. I'm an associate professor in the School of Social Work. And a moment in my life that made me want to engage in activism. I was a little kid. It was the 1970s. And my mother walked in the house after being at work and had a big button on her jacket and it said ERA yes. And I was like, what is that about? She says, Equal Rights Amendment, equal rights for women, and she gave me a little TED talk, a little clinic on what that meant. And I feel like it was the first time I remember feeling really aware of my gender in that moment and how I might not have the access to the same opportunities as other genders. And so I feel like that has really fueled me throughout much of what I have done in my life.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Terri Friedline, she, her pronouns. I'm a professor here in the School of Social Work. I can think of many moments. The one that is coming to mind right now is when I was a student in my Bachelor's of Social Work program. I went to a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania that got its degree accreditation from Temple University in Philadelphia. And so it's not where my degree is from, but it's where I attended for my social work education. And the school that I was a part of decided that they were going to close that program and they were going to shut down this Philadelphia campus. And, staff, faculty would be displaced. It was an experience that I really cherished and wanted other social work students coming after me to be able to also, study and learn in a pretty amazing city. And my fellow students and I, wrote and protested our directors and petitioned our faculty at the Temple University campus. And that has, that is one moment that I think of where, because when I moved to Michigan several years ago, I found all of these letters that we had written and some of the materials that we produced. And I didn't realize, how important that was and how much work we actually did to try to keep that place open. So that's the moment I'll share.
Thank you, everyone. Hi, I'm Natalie Sampson. I'm a professor of public health, and I'm in the same department as Dr. Bell at the other end. Dearborn's bookending us here. So, and my work is, excuse me, mostly around environmental justice. So I get to work with organizers, local government, a lot of youth in trying to just build capacity and help people navigate environmental policy, environmental health issues. And I couldn't think of one moment, just like everyone, I think there's many. And also just thinking of, if you go back and look at little Natalie at, 10 years old or whatever, you wouldn't have guessed I was on a trajectory of being a scholar activist. I was watching TV and eating microwave food like most kids of the 80s and 90s. But really watching my parents work a million hours, my dad a mechanic, and that smell that still I smell it and I think of him coming home in the morning after 12-hour shifts. And don't get me wrong, we lived a very privileged life and it was very possible as a working class, family. But when I got to college here, I had no clue what I was doing. I had no clue what research was. I had no next steps, what public health was, but I had a summer research project that was around the Ambassador Bridge, looking at truck traffic and all these dots of living and growing up and having a Papa Ford and a Papa Chevrolet and the legacy of the Motor City really added up to seeing, what harms come with that privilege. And having faculty at 18, 20 years old saying, this is research, this is a way to do research, following the lead of community was just mind-blowing for me. So I would say that's what really shaped me moving forward and thinking about that you could do this in academia.
I think I'll grab this. Yeah. Less noisy, perhaps a little less disruptive. Move to the next slide for me, please. All right, so we're going to start our discussion and we can go one at a time down the row, or people can just, whoever feels like raising their hand, you don't have to answer them all, but we would love to hear from you. So I'm just going to start the first question. Please share a bit about your experience with or your areas of expertise related to community action. You all gave us a little hint, a little idea on what formed you and a little bit of what you do, but let's go with, a little bit about your experience and your experience related to community action. Who would like to go first? Am I going to have to fish?
Yeah. Could we try having someone say something again and just so I can check in with Zoom and see if we can dispense with the mic? Does somebody want to volunteer to say something? Terri, I'll pick on you.
Sounds good. I'm happy to. Question is, what's our current work? A bit about our current experiences. How does this sound? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm checking with the chat.
Just throw your stuff over there on one of those chairs and jump in.
Okay, they say that they can hear you, so maybe we try going forward without the mic and then, but chat, if you can hear me, and I'll put this in message, let me know and we'll get back to the mic, but let's try without, just because that'll be easier.
Okay, so I'll keep going. I'm going to aim to still project probably.
A is the interpreter saying prefer.
Okay.
No problem.
Yeah.
Hello, Lisa, thank you for joining us on this miserable day. We had some technical difficulties, so we started off a little late anyway, so we're just really getting started. But it happened to me too. Would you please take a minute and introduce yourself? And then also one of the questions that they've asked already, they've answered is, I don't know, a moment in your life that was maybe a catalyst or that made you want to get involved in community action.
So my apologies for being late. There was horrible weather driving from the Flint campus, but I'm so happy to be here. So my name is Dr. Lisa Laprousse. I am an associate professor in the Department of Public Health and Health Sciences, and I also serve as the research director for the Inclusive History Project on our U of M Flint campus, and that's a tri-campus initiative. So I'm actually here more than just today. But I was thinking about this question about, when did you kind of get activated as an academic? And my advocacy work started much earlier than when I was an academic. So I'm a first generation college student. And at the time that I was going to school, and this is in California, I lived in a Chicano Latino dorm. And they were attempting to rid affirmative action. And everybody on campus labeled us the affirmative action building. So I think for people that have had or that come from historically excluded communities, you often don't have the choice about whether or not to become an activist or engage in political conversations. You're kind of forced into the forefront because your very presence on campus is a site of contention for people. And so, it very much shaped my experience. And then, of course, throughout my academic journey as a student, everywhere I went, there was, I was at my undergrad degree is in women and gender studies. And much like today, those programs were being threatened to be closed. And this has been, a consistent thing that has been throughout my academic journey. So it very much didn't start when I was in academia, but as a student. But I think, being a faculty member, kind of a catalyst point that really kind of made me jump into community work and trying to integrate that with my classes as well was the Flint water crisis. That was something that could not be ignored. There was a need. I'm a public health professional. There was, clear alignment, but also with the Latinx community, we are a small but mighty community, and information was incredibly delayed going to that community. And as somebody that is first generation, I have always felt a responsibility to give back to my community and make the sacrifice of moving across country a few times, not being with my family, making sure that those sacrifices were worth it. And to me, trying to advance initiatives or just a better way of life for my community is incredibly important to my personal as well as my academic identity.
And you want to tackle question number one that I had to fish?
I thought Terri was. I actually can't, but if somebody else is ready, then they can. Terri, were you gonna go or no? No pressure.
Yes.
Or Candace, are you ready to go? Candace is gonna go. Look at that. Candace is ready to go.
So thinking about my experiences, so even though I'm in social work, I have a background in theater and modern dance. And so most of my community action, community organizing has been around the performing arts, and staying with the theme of gender equity. It's been over 20 years now. I worked with some community members to create a feminist theater company, and that was a huge lesson in community organizing and fundraising and what does the community want? What is our role in that? And I would say that, staying with the performing arts and seeing them as a tool for action, for raising critical consciousness of communities, but also encouraging action has been really inspiring. Yeah. Sorry. And so.
Actually, that segues nicely. That's kind of say I will go. So there's a nice segue here. Yeah, the question is in part about our expertise, right? And I'm a scholar of religion in Southeast Asia. So on the surface, it's like that has nothing to do with my activism, right? There actually are ways that it connects. You didn't come here for an anthropology lecture, so I won't go into that. But what I want to emphasize here is when I'm organizing, and specifically when we were organizing our union, it involves a lot of like conversations with people, a lot of one-on-one. You got to build bridges. You got to like form relationships with folks, right? And I remember I would turn to the union staffer who would come with me, and I would be like, "Oh, this feels like field work to me as an anthropologist. It feels like ethnography, right?" And at one point, he said to me, he said, "Oh yeah, when I go out with like the therapists who were organizing for USU at the time, he's like, they say it feels like therapy, and when I go out with the administrative folks, like they say it feels like the work they're doing." And that was a moment for me. I was like, oh, like whatever we're doing, like the tools for it, the tools for building community, the tools for the kind of work we want to do, like we can find that in our expertise, right? Because so much of what we do is about connection and building those relationships and building community, right? So yeah. Okay.
Great.
So I'm going to build on that because one of the things I've done over the last few years is work with our chapter on the Ann Arbor campus of the AAUP, and I'm currently the secretary of the chapter. And a couple years ago, I went through this training about building power and organizing, having structured organizing conversations, and really investing in the labor of the workplace. So one of the things that maybe sometimes comes more easily to us as academics is, doing something as an individual that then also accrues accolades for our CVs and, has some other rewards to it. So you can, work with an elected official, perhaps on their campaign or an issue that they care about, which can be a form of activism or advocacy. And you also kind of get credit for it in how we've decided to structure higher education. You can write an opinion editorial and have that published in a national outlet, and that can be an important form of communication. And it also then gets, accolades to you as an individual. And so I really think like we are called as academics to do something, learn things that are different in these moments. I think organizing together is really critical to sort of shape the conditions here in our workplaces, and to be able to build enough power and grow enough support so that when we come to an administration that's making decisions about things like gender affirming healthcare, support for ethnic studies or other cultural programs at the university, that is making decisions about an Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, for example, that those issues are also connected to everything that's happening outside of our particular workplace contexts. And in higher education, connected to how communities are, being oppressed and punished by ICE, all of these other things. And so I think in these political moments, we're called to organize, I think, with our colleagues differently and draw on skills differently than what we have in the past. And so getting some skills myself to be able to do that more effectively, to encourage my colleagues to be able to organize in that way, that is something that I'm working on growing, and how I am shifting the ways that I see some of my contributions related to activism and the academy a little bit differently than maybe I had in the past.
I'll just make a comment about double dipping or triple dipping. Reflecting back on my experience as a student, I remember, there were people that were on hunger strikes and stuff, and they weren't going to classes. And it was very much kind of getting pulled into that. And I had to step back and think about, why am I here at the institution? I had a lot of weight on my shoulders being the first one. I said, I can't be the first one to go and to be dismissed. And I think that this is something we need to think about also as academics of how do we make this work count and continue to move forward with our promotions. And so I think role modeling is incredibly important for our students. And I'm very fortunate where public health lends itself very well to activism. We actually just spoke last night in our class about community organizing. So we embrace community-based participatory research where we, really get our feet on the ground and work with community members to identify health problems and co-create solutions to them. But what I've done is I really embraced service learning as a helpful method for moving community initiatives or concerns forward while giving my students hands-on experience of doing this work. And one example of this was during the COVID pandemic. There was, of course, as you know, lots of fear around the vaccination. And so while there was a lot of information going out about safety, people wanted to have the information reflect them. So see trusted individuals. And so the students, we actually partnered with art and pharmacy. So art on the U of M Flint campus and then pharmacy here in Ann Arbor. And they went out and they did interviews with community members about their concerns, why they were vaccinating, why they were not. And we actually created some educational videos as well as a pamphlet that was reflective of the Flint community. So when they heard testimonies, it was from people they ran into at the grocery store. And this was an incredibly great experience for the students to learn how do you put theory into practice, but also it had a very practical application for the community in helping to, maybe answer some of those questions that remained about how the virus was spread and how to protect oneself and what were the different risks and benefits to vaccination.
Thank you. I want to echo a lot of what other folks said, and I had things that I was going to say, and then I'm not sure if I'm going to, but I do want to kind of highlight some of the points. So some things that I've done is a lot of community-based research, and I think for me, and it was part of why I struggle with like why community action, because like I'm not really sure what the alternative is. Like that feels just kind of like I don't really know what that is, and I think for me, one of the things that I've thought a lot about, and part of this comes from one of my mentors from when I was here, Ruben Miller, who's now at University of Chicago. He writes a lot about the gift of proximity. And so I think particularly, and this kind of echoes some of what other folks were saying, is like, what are you close to and how do you need to be taking action with what you're close to? So for me, I live in the city of Ypsilanti. When I moved to Michigan, I moved to Ypsi. That's the only place I've lived here. And I did my PhD here in Ann Arbor. And, when I was looking at, I was doing research with farmers and gardeners. And one of the big things that was coming up for BIPOC farmers and gardeners in particular was the problems in terms of access to land. And a lot of those problems were because of the policies of Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan in terms of gentrification. And now living in Ypsilanti, one of the big things that I hope all of you are aware of, right, is the ways that the university is trying to force a, data target in terms of nuclear war for all of us here in Washtenaw County, right, onto the city environmental racism disaster, onto the township of Ypsilanti. So I think there's also this piece where it's like I'm always kind of thinking, and I think a lot of this, and especially, you know, there's ways that I'm an insider and there's ways that I'm an outsider, right? And so what is my responsibility to the people who I consider my people who are sort of outside of the institutions of power? And what is my responsibility in terms of also holding those institutions accountable, right? And so I really appreciate, especially the work of Faculty Senate, AAP, in terms of building power within that so that we can actually be effective in terms of that. And especially the ways that we all need to skill up in this moment. I mean, I was a paid community organizer as a social worker before I came here and did went more of an academic route. And also I need better skills than I have right now, you know? So we were just talking about like our weekend plans. I'm like, I've been doing this online training about how to have better conversations because I need to get more effective at this, right? And so I think, you know, this moment just calls for all of us to really be really honest about who we are, what are we doing, what do we need to learn to do better, you know? So Natalie, and also in terms of mentorship, Natalie is my mentor, so I'm like the luckiest person on the planet. So Natalie, do you have anything?
She can't say no now.
Yeah.
I thought you well.
Thank you. I think what folks are talking about, you know, the issues of positionality and our identities and all of that, of course, and the skills that we get in these fields. We're all up here from social work, public health, history is relevant to all of this, right? So, but I have found such good relationships with those folks across different communities, different disciplines who see the value in this work and working together, which has been really powerful. So finding the engineers who want to work in relationship on community action when it comes to environmental issues, for instance. And I'll just say too, you know, I know Lisa mentioned community-based participatory research as one model, but also just really grateful for having the chance to be schooled by a lot of activists and movement leaders who push back on, you know, or help these frameworks evolve in a way that we really have to keep thinking about, you know, what is our role, what is our job, what is our responsibility, what risks are we taking, all of that stuff. And so, you know, attention that I have talked about with a lot of friends in this work and in this space is a lot of this work is in partnership, and that's great, but a lot of environmental justice work is about getting out of the way and listening and following and not leading. And so, you know, I think we talk about this in my classes, but it's really something that I keep learning and relearning of just how to show up in different, you know, ways in different times and places. You know, sometimes I'm kind of shy back and I'm saying, I don't want to be the person who's quoted in the news story, or, you know, it shouldn't be me. And sometimes my partners will say, no, it needs to be you because they're not going to listen to me. And so just really kind of constantly checking in with ourselves is a skill that I wouldn't have had at 20 years old, but it takes doing this work for a really, really long time, I think. In teaching community organizing and listening to my students analyze movements and leaders and talking about the issues they care about, and, you know, realizing I don't know anything. You know, there's a lot more to learn. So I'm just happy to be here with all of these folks who are sort of fumbling through the same space together.
Back to me. Thank you. Okay, all right. The second time I got offered, I have to say yes. Okay, all right. So I think in a sense, we've talked a lot about the next question from your own, I don't know, angle and what you've been doing and how it matches in with your discipline and what you do. But I think this is more of a turn of a little bit of advice. How can faculty in various disciplines engage in community action? So that's how can faculty in various disciplines engage in community action? Would anybody like to go first? Want to think for a moment? Oh, yeah. All right. Thank you, Ken.
Yeah, so I have a somewhat brief answer to this, but it's a quote. So one of the people who helped me so much when I was first starting my research here in Michigan is Melvin Parson, who is the visionary leader of We the People Opportunity Farm. And he played a huge role in terms of shaping me as a person, in terms of shaping my dissertation research. And he passed actually last week. So there's a huge hole in Washtenaw County and Ypsi, from all the things that he gave during his lifetime. And when I was looking at this, I was reminded of one of the times he would often come and speak to my classes. He spoke to my class last semester. And in 2017, I was teaching an environmental justice class here on Ann Arbor's campus. And he was there speaking along with a friend of mine, Joe Riley. And one of the students asked a question of, well, how do you get involved in things? How do you choose what to get involved in? All of that. And Melvin had this quote that I just really appreciated, which was like, well, close your eyes, put out your hands, and walk one step, and you will stumble into all kinds of injustice that you need to get involved in, and social justice that you need to be playing a part in. And so I think, that was kind of what I was thinking about with this question, is that, I think for me, and it's, as someone who's in social work, like Natalie was saying, like, it's very obvious, and this is sort of very normal to be doing community action, although certainly, as we all know, ways that that's increasingly under threat. But for folks who maybe your discipline is not quite as obvious, there still are justice issues in all of the disciplines, right? In engineering, there are huge justice issues. In AI, there are huge justice issues, right? In math, there are huge justice issues. And I know lots of wonderful people who are doing all kinds of great community action in those fields. But I just really, it's like, again, it's that sort of gift of proximity. What are you close to, right? And your voice as an expert in this field can be incredibly useful. And so how can you utilize that?
Yeah.
So just instinctual answer to this question was working with students is a great way to become involved with the community. They are invested in the future. They are invested in what's happening in their own communities. And frankly, I think they're way more connected than faculty are to what's going on. So I think just listening to the issues students are concerned about, encouraging students to create student-led projects, asking, if you're working with a group of students on a research project, getting their perspectives, getting their insights. I've been connected with amazing organizations and collaborators through students. So, yeah.
So I think the important thing to think about is like, how do I get started? I would suggest be in community, be present. I am on a community meeting every Wednesday. So I know what residents, clergy are kind of dealing with, and by being present in community, lots of opportunities open up, and you can pick and choose, because there will not be a limit of opportunities available. And that's something I didn't learn early on. I thought I had to jump at everything that was made available to me. And now I realize that my plate is too full, and I want to be accountable to everybody. So I have to be more selective in what I say yes to. But be in community, be present, look for those opportunities where you can share your skill set, your resources. So sometimes they need access to journals, or they need help with grant writing. That is not a skill that many community organizers have in the same way that we do. So there's lots of different ways to get involved. You don't have to be, I think, oftentimes people conceptualize activism as rallies and, megaphones, and however you are comfortable, that can be a way of activism. And it could be helping to write papers, grants, helping to find space or provide space, connecting different people, So if you know experts in a particular area like environmental justice that can help come speak or champion things, that is incredible big help for communities. And then I would just say that when you decide to get involved, to pick something that you're truly passionate about, because you have to be willing to invest long term. We have seen so many examples of bad university community relationships where it's very extractive, and we don't want to perpetuate that cycle. So go in knowing that this is going to be a long-term investment for you. You will develop a reputation for being a helicopter researcher if that's what you do. And it makes it much harder for other people to go in and do work because the trust has just been diminished. And so, like I said, just pick something that you know you're going to show up to, and know that this is very much relational work. And so you have to go to the birthday parties and the weddings and the funerals, and when it's not convenient, because you have to show up for people to understand that this is not just another way for you to get a step up in your promotion or another thing on your resume. This has to be true to, who you are. And it's very important to be very transparent about what you need out of the interaction. So, if you need to get a publication out because you're like, look, I'm going up for promotion or I don't have tenure and I'd like to keep my job, lay it out on the table and allow them to do that as well. What do they need? Having those transparent conversations early on is so critical to having equitable partnerships, but also effective partnerships that are going to last a long time.
So I'll connect this question to the previous question about expertise in some ways. As academics, expertise is kind of our thing, right? And that can be great, right? We want to be bringing these skills to all of these endeavors. And there's nothing I think more fun than working in an academic union, because it's like all of our our buttons were designed by someone who works in graphic design, right? And we had someone at the bargaining table with us who actually studies negotiation, right? So the expertise is great. But a big part of building coalitions, a big part of building community, right, is getting out of the way. As academics, that's not how we're trained to be, right? We often feel like we have to be the expert in the room, and when we're not, it feels something, right? This was one of the reasons I really found one university that I mentioned earlier so formative for me, right? This was a space where students and staff and faculty sat at a table together and strategized and worked together. And we all had to get out of each other's way to do that. We all had to, treat each other as experts. But I do think if the question is how can faculty engage in these kinds of activities, these kinds of activism, is I think for many of us, the most important first lesson is that, right? I don't have to be the expert all the time. I need to take a step back. I need to really be with others. So.
I think that something I've learned over time, building off of everything that addresses this question, is it also doesn't have to be big and shiny. I was trained up by some amazing scholars who, I'll name our beloved Barbara Israel, who also just recently passed. And they could get these huge grants and get these big community partnerships together, and it's amazing work. And I couldn't always copy and paste that, right? That is something that is amazing and transformational. Sometimes, and she would tell me this and other mentors would tell me this, that is CBPR, or that is, community engaged or activist scholarship. you working with one person on the ground together, getting something done. So I think for maybe someone who's not put their toe into this, but cares about an issue or knows their expertise could help change a policy or a community's quality of life, it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be, we could get into all of the things about tenure, it doesn't have to be a massive grant. It doesn't have to be 20 publications. And it shouldn't be necessarily, right? And so I think how can you demystify and leverage your resources? And that's just something I feel like the folks here, it sounds like, do every day, but not everybody has tried that. And I'll just add, this sounds really simple and it's something that people think they're really good at. But I've just been on the soapbox about plain language and demystifying processes and translating your own work. And it doesn't have to be a huge process. It's, but I just think we as academics, as a collective, are horrible at it. And we make systems worse. We make it harder for people to get to things that they need, that makes things actionable. And so if we could all just work on that a little bit, I think the world would be better.
I don't think I have anything more to add. I mean, community, proximity, it sounds like being humble and in our approach in working with others. I mean, it's great things that I heard from my colleagues here.
There's a lot in this last question set, and I would like to break them up if you don't mind. What challenges are involved in this work, and how do you navigate these in your own community action efforts? I might like to come back to benefits afterward. Maybe let's talk about the challenges and how you navigate the challenges. We know there are challenges. Okay, thank you.
So I was put on a watch list by Turning Point USA for my advocacy work, specifically things that were named were my pro-vaccination stance. And I'm like, come on, guys. I'm in public health. I have to believe in vaccines. But during the COVID pandemic, I was working with community partners and I was asked to go in front of city council to make statements about the public health impact on the Flint community. So when we were preparing to go to the meeting, there was a lot of emotion and just anger about a K through 12 mask mandate that was implemented in Genesee County. Our medical director for the county had her life threatened. And when we had to go in front of city council, we actually had to be escorted by the sheriff's department. And this was not something that I at all had anticipated. When I, as first gen, I don't know what gave me the idea of like, oh yeah, I'm just going to become a professor. Like I did not anticipate being on television and those types of things, which make me very nervous. But I definitely did not intend or imagine that I would be on a watch list or have to be, under protection to make a statement on the behalf of community and health. So I think there are some real big, threats. Doxing is real. But the thing, and we can take responsibility and we can kind of make that determination. But again, something that I had not anticipated was we were talking about our work on systemic racism in Genesee County, and we have a website. And my research assistant was on television with us on ABC 12. And they also did like a write-up of the interview. And she shared her personal experience of being pregnant and what it was like as a Black mother, to not really be taken serious when she was experiencing complications and actually needed a blood transfusion. And the vitriol that came towards her, not me, was something I did not expect. And so now that I'm on a watch list, when I interview my students before I hire them, I talk about this because I don't want to scare them, but I know that I cannot completely protect them from, my work and being associated with me and what that may mean. And sometimes that means like having a really candid conversation with them because they're just like, oh, cool. Or like, like, oh, you must have a big name. Like they don't necessarily think about, the consequences of this. But it's something that weighs heavy on me because, like I said, like it's one thing to put myself out in that area, but it's another thing to know that, my students just being affiliated with me may be impacted.
I want to reiterate something Lisa brought up earlier, that I think a big challenge is time and capacity. We, as faculty, we do a lot already, and the boundaries around our work are not there really. And so engaging in community action can feel like, oh my gosh, it's one more thing that I have to add to my very long list. And so I think it's important to not get stuck in that thinking, though, and to find ways that you can align what you're already doing with community action. So.
Yeah, so speaking to those points, which were both really powerful, I think one of the other things, in addition to time, it's just the ways that like most of us have been socialized as academics and how much community action and community engaged scholarship goes against that. I remember I was applying for a grant and I was creating a community advisory board for the project that I was working on. And, lots of community stakeholders, it's a public project. But anyways, and I was getting sort of pressure to name the people who are going to be on the community advisory board. And I was like, yeah, I'm working on this. We've been working in relationship for literally years, right? And they're like, well, can't you just email to get a commitment? I was like, no, we're having waffles at their apartment in a week and a half. And, then they're coming to my house later. And, and like the community advisory board, it's turned out that basically the only time people can meet is on Sunday mornings. And I had originally planned that all of our meetings would be at the public library, which is who houses this public oral history project that we work on. And, the library isn't open on Sunday mornings. And so it's like, all right, well, everyone comes to my house, and we make food for them. And, and so it's this piece around time and sort of the additional work and like, how does the academy recognize that or not recognize that? And I feel very fortunate that in being at Dearborn, I feel like it is valued in a way that I don't know that it always is in other universities or other campuses. But it's just like a whole sort of different way of being and like different boundaries than I think we're taught to have. But also that's part of what like makes it really beautiful and valuable is like it really is real relationships, and I think that is what's going to get us through. And what's going to protect us is having real, deep, authentic relationships.
Good. Terri. Yeah.
Well, first I want to say, Lisa, I'm sorry that that is a challenge that is in your work, and that it is in lots of other people's work as well. I find, I don't know if, others on the panel find this experience, but we are so pushed for time. And I find when I make space for some of those authentic relationships and being in community with, the people that you're in community with, I find that that kind of uplifts my capacity to do other things in ways that I didn't anticipate. I mean, even if my time is still stretched, my energy has changed, and I find that to be really valuable. My research is in like money and banking and technology and surveillance, kind of in the context of racial capitalism and systems of oppression. And this is also my third university. And so developing like long commitments with community partners just hasn't been a feature of my research. So I've found that I've had, a boundary between and ways to do my work that is not community engaged research, that takes a different shape. And so the sorts of activism in the community that I'm involved in are from like being in community with people that I, see every week outside of my job, or, I'm involved in other things. And so what I'm thinking about for this panel, though, is kind of organizing my faculty colleagues. And I think one challenge for me in that work is that, like, we do not always have great relationships with our colleagues. And we want to organize them anyway. So that, I mean, is a real tension, I think, in at least as I'm thinking about this question in the context of the community action efforts that I'm involved in with like the Ann Arbor chapter of the AAUP. I mean, getting people to become members and be more involved. I may have done something as a part of my work that has angered somebody else in the process, and I have to go to them and then ask them, how do you want to be supported in your job? What are your concerns about academic freedom and shared governance, and make sure that they feel heard and supported in that process. And just doesn't always feel great, but I think it's a practice and a process and a challenge that I do hope is a thing that moves us toward building more power on this campus.
You want to go?
Just sort of building with some examples of the issue of sort of what's normalized in the academy versus not, but thinking about maybe it's a less of a challenge now, but those skills of how to do this in the right way and stay in your job. So, we talk a lot in some of my spaces about you can do advocacy, you can't lobby, but you can do a lot if it's related to, your work. And I think a lot of folks don't sort of know how to differentiate that. Obviously, with our hats off, we can go off into the world and do our own, work. But it took me a long time to learn how to speak to decision makers or to go to city council meetings. I didn't have those skills. I was really lucky that during my doctoral program, I was able to be part of a program where we went to the EPA and we had to practice talking. You'd think with all the skills we get that's one that people would share and pass down, but I feel like that's rare. And so I think learning how to do that has been really important. And just to Finn's point about what's valued and normalized, I remember this grant I had, and I had needed an extension on it because community work does not look the same timeline as some other work, and grants don't always line up. But I was basically told it was a failure because we didn't get the next big, huge grant. And I was so proud of this work because we used the data to go to city council to advocate for this ordinance that passed. And I had never been so just disappointed in some colleagues to hear them say that was a failure, because to me, that was the ultimate goal. And so really just keeping track of what your goals are, because it's easy to lose track of that when doing this work. But lots of stories I could tell. That's just one.
Not only Terri, those last two comments are perfect and will dovetail with kind of what I was thinking about, and kind of what has been my most recent kind of challenge. I think the most about it involves navigating these kinds of relationships, right? Both emotionally and strategically. So activism is not always confrontational, but it often is. It can be, right? But oftentimes you're like kind of like confronting, but then collaborating, but then confronting, but then collaborating, and like navigating those relationships can be really, really challenging. In my role now as union president, like there are literally like Thursdays where I am like in a conversation with someone, a decision maker that I am like yelling at. And then the next morning we're in a meeting having to collaborate to like accomplish something together, and like navigating that and both emotional labor, but also like how do you make those decisions? Like how do you strategically decide like this is the time to collaborate, this is the time to confront? Like these are the kinds of things that I've been thinking about lately and that I find the most challenging. They're really important questions. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, even on our little campus, Dan, our little friendly family-like campus, Dan. All right, well, before we switch over to questions from the audience, let's go back to those benefits. Let's try to end on that. We've talked about the challenges and navigating those challenges. Now let's talk about some benefits to all that. Yeah. Thank you.
So I think one of the benefits which I started to kind of point to, and certainly your all's conversations also made me think about, is, and I think about this both in terms of my research, but also my teaching, and then also just like who I am in the world, you know, doing neighborhood organizing, doing different things that's sort of separate from my role. I think that when you are willing to talk about the real things that are happening, you're willing to show up as like a full human being as best as you can in these moments. And then you're also, you know, able to both learn from the students, the community partners, and also share the resources and the skill sets that you have. And, you know, especially with the students, to help them to develop sort of the resources about how do you navigate this world that we're living in and show up as an authentic, full human being who is, you know, like actually living your purpose, right? In terms of making this a more just world. I think to me, the just the like emotional boost, you know, that gives me, like, it helps me to be more courageous. It helps me to be more authentic. It helps me to be more open and vulnerable and actually show up, you know? And so even just selfishly, you know, I think that the more we can show up as if we are, you know, it's a prefigurative politics, as if we are in the world that we want to live in, the better off we all are. And that's hard in this moment, you know, and certainly depending on our identities, we face, you know, more or less attacks on that. I'm a white person. I'm also trans. And, you know, being like a trans professor who teaches social justice and social work in this moment is scary, and who's not tenured yet, right? So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. But, you know, so like, I just think like, you know, but also it kind of kills my soul to still not show up in the way that I know I need to show up, especially with students who are, and especially working in Dearborn and teaching in Dearborn right now, students who are so impacted in so many really horrific ways. And so, you know, how do we really show up as who we are to be, you know, who we're meant to be, and the ways that just on a spiritual level, like that feeds me and that helps me to continue to be in this world and continue to do work, is knowing that I'm in community. So yeah.
So I think in general, I'm just a very passionate person. I'm like, go big or go home. You know, I've had this conversation with my therapist many, many times. Like, why can't I just be quiet in meetings? Why do I do this to myself? My life would be so much easier if I could just, be the wallflower that, other people are. But and her response is, that's just not who you are. And, and she's right, because I've tried to, be somebody different. And I think if I didn't do this work, I might combust. Um, you know, this work is not always celebrated and counted in our dossiers in the same way that traditional research or work is done. And so I think you have to, for me at least, um, think about other things that are part of your identity, perhaps, or core to who you are, and use this as a way to fulfill yourself and see your life's purpose. So I get a credible amount of satisfaction out of the work that I do. Whenever I hear people say, like, if I could just change one person's life, and I'm like, one, like, man, that is setting the bar low. Like, I want to change like a person's life every single day. And, I think what makes me a good instructor is bringing that passion, bringing that real world experience into it, because I hope that they feel activated and that they understand that they have agency and they understand the importance of like voting and and so it's not just like talking the talk but walking the walk. And it does like I think somebody else said that it's not like we have more time, but the energy just seems different when you're really fulfilling what you feel like is your life's purpose.
I think my sense is that we're all up here because we're committed to community, we're committed to our communities, we're committed to a just community, right? And I think that for me, the benefit is like we don't have enough spaces to do that in our society, right? And doing this work helps us to create those communities and be a part of those communities. And this connects to the feelings, like the feelings we're all having, right? So I had dinner last night with a couple of former students, Lucine and Alicia, who worked with us on 1U, who are now doing incredible immigration work. They've co-founded this organization in Flint that just continues to grow. They're literally raising money and getting people out of detention. I mean, they're just doing incredible work. I'm so proud of them. And it felt so good just to like sit down and have a few drinks and talk with them about the work they're doing. And that feels good, yes, but why does it feel good? It feels good because that indexes the community that we've built, right? That indexes like the usness there, the we-ness. And so when I hear like all of the talk of like, oh, it feels good, it does feel good, but it feels good, I think, right? My theory would be because we're doing that work. We're doing that work of building an us. And an earlier, younger version of myself might have looked at that and been like, oh no, what really matters are structures and justice and this and that. But actually, I really have come around to the idea that it really comes down to that experience of an us first, and then all the other stuff, is framed around that. So. Terri, I'm not sure who to give it to. Like,
So I'll just add on with these good feelings. I mean, I want to narrow the gap between what my values are, what I believe in, and what I'm doing. And it feels really good to just stand in your values when you know that you're doing that, when you're like in good community with people, when you are doing something that matters for other people. I like, sometimes you get to see how it matters for people, like a dinner with students, or you've made space for something that didn't exist previously, and that's really important at like an institution of higher education where there aren't many spaces always to ask critical questions or to do critical work. I'm going to add in like a benefit, like a legacy benefit. Like I have 2 young kids and I want them to like also know how to be in community with people and how to organize, or at least like get a sense that they have a like some form of responsibility, kind of moral duty to be involved in creating the world. I want to help create the world, build the world a little bit better for them to live in, and like for them to be able to do that as well.
Yes, I also raised 2 little social justice warriors, explaining the school to prison pipeline over dinner when they were 10, and taking them to protest like One You protest, both of my daughters. And I just want to say shout out to FAIR, the Flint Alliance for Immigrant Rights, a really fantastic organization. What a benefit. What a lot of fantastic benefits personally and to the community. All right, so we do have some questions that folks submitted when they registered. However, who is in charge of questions from the chat? That will be you. All right, so would you mind? Thank you. Okay, we can't really manage being on TV due to lots of reasons, but we work hard to do what we can without that kind of exposure. Can allies who are not members of vulnerable populations be on TV for all the rest of us who can't? The question. Who would be the person, the ideal person to be on TV who wouldn't be vulnerable? And the white male?
The white male.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's a tough one.
I'll take this. And I definitely want to hear what everyone else thinks, as always. I think these are questions that you can't answer in the abstract. I mean, you mentioned earlier, Natalie, right? Like you're like, oh, I don't want to do that, but your community members you're partnering with, like, oh no, you need to be one that does that, right? And it's always a negotiation, and it's a negotiation that is about kind of our thoughts and feelings, but more importantly, like these are ultimately strategic questions, right? It's about what you're trying to accomplish as a group. And so I do think there are some like general principles, right? Like those of us, and I would put myself in this category for all the reasons, who are relatively privileged in these conversations, like we need to be aware and make sure we're not taking up too much space. On the other hand, like there may be a time and a place where it's really valuable for someone like me to step up and to be the face of something. And it's really difficult to answer those questions in the abstract. It depends on the specific context. And so, yeah, I hope that sounded like an answer and not a cop out, but what do others think?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah. I was just going to say that, in the particular political environment we're in right now, I think it could be very wise to be cautious about the things that you agree to. And I just want to reiterate again that this work will continue. This will not be your only opportunity. And so if you feel particularly vulnerable because of the community that you identify with, or because your status at the institution, you can do lower risk things, and maybe you're not a people person and you're like, oh God, I don't want to go to these things and mingle with people and touch them or whatever, and that's okay, because not everybody's built for that. But, I know some incredibly smart people that can do statistics like I can't. And there is room for everybody at the table. And so find what is authentic to yourself and have conversations with trusted individuals about your decisions. So, when I found out, I got an email that alerted me to being on the watch list. And I believe now that it was meant to let me know that I was there. It was not, it was just to raise my awareness, not in a beneficial way. But I sought out the advice of other academics because I had never experienced that. Nobody in my department has experienced that. I believe I'm the only person on my campus that has been put on that watch list. And so I talked to them and they said, no, you need to, because I was like, do I just blow this off? Like, I don't know how to handle this. I don't want to be paranoid. And they said, no, you need to talk to your university security. And I did. And then he said he contacted his FBI contact, and that just shot up my anxiety to like a whole other level. But when, not too far back, I, discussed with my spouse, I'm going to be at a public thing. There's going to be media, and they've asked me to talk about the public health consequences of mass deportation. We had to have conversations about that. And the compromise was like my spouse bought cameras and put them all over our house. So again, I think it's okay to be cautious and to find what you're comfortable with, because unfortunately, like we can't always like roll things back and just say like, I want to take that back because, things live on the internet forever.
So I think both points are super important. And I think people, especially who are targeted, should not feel forced to, to take public stands and to, expose yourself to being targeted more, for sure. And there's ideas and situations I've had in my own life in terms of that. But also, I guess one of the things, because at first my mind went totally blank when you all asked this question. And then I remembered that actually I was on TV like a few weeks ago. And I was like, oh, well, what prompted me to be on TV in that moment? And it was that there was a horrible situation in my neighborhood where the Ypsi police and the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office tortured a man in his house for 30 hours. And we, as the people who were around that, witnessed that. And so I was, we were filming and trying to, document to try to make it less likely that they would kill him. Got approached by a news crew and at first didn't want to do it, but I was with someone who's a comrade who was doing it. And I felt like, especially because I did used to run like a 24-hour crisis line as part of being a social worker, I was like, oh, people will listen to me when I say that I'm a social worker and that this is not what de-escalation looks like in a crisis. You don't torture someone more and more and say, it's all up to you. The choice is yours. We'll stop, hitting you with a fire hose if you just come out. And so it was one of those times where I was just like, I feel like I can make a difference in this moment because I do have a certain amount of, professional credibility where they will listen to me in a way that they would not, my other friends and comrades who I was with, right? So I think there's also this piece where it's like, that's kind of like what you were saying, Dan, too. Like, you can't plan. There's no perfect way to do things, but things happen. And then you just have to make decisions for yourself and also with the other people, who you're working with, who you're organizing with, about who is most at risk here, who's most able to like make an impact, So I think that just being open and being very real about the risks, but also, especially if you're a person with privilege, be courageous. Courage is contagious and we need courage right now. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry. More Simpson.
It's good for me. And I'll just say too, I think coming into college as first gen too, and being like, look, mom and dad, I'm on the news. Or, I think those first opportunities, you feel special that you have this new expertise and that someone wants to hear it. And so, obviously now I can be more intentional about how I handle these situations. But I think just recognizing, again, it's another thing that academia is like, oh, that looks good on my, a media. And so just really checking in on your values, because I'm sure if anyone's listening in who's, just starting off, it's tempting to be, out there in that way. And then I want to go back to something Lisa said earlier about sort of really checking in. I've done a lot of work with youth, and media want to talk to youth. They want their voices. And so thinking about media training and what that looks like, and being really honest and having those conversations, because it's, the same. I think they're excited to be featured or whatever, but making sure that we're all checking in about how to keep safe for, in those opportunities. So that's all.
Okay. I think that you guys were just talking about really fits in well with the next question about being on TV and things. It says, when writing an op-ed or offering a professional take on an issue in another media form, how do you effectively assert or establish your expertise while clearly separating your own opinions from that of the university? Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I jumped in. I recently published an op-ed, so it's good to reflect on that. That's an interesting question. I'll tell you what drew me to this op-ed are my positionalities. It had to do with where I was raised, where I went to school, my positionalities as an artist, and really advocating for arts funding in schools. But I also was able to bring in my social work lens, and I did bring in my role as a faculty member at the University of Michigan as well. I didn't feel like I had to make and I realized that as faculty, we're not able to advocate for political issues in our role as faculty. However, I can't extricate the fact that I am a faculty member, right? I mean, that's going to shape the conversations I have, the events I attend, the communities that I'm engaged with. And so with the op-ed piece, I didn't feel like I had to make that delineation at all. And it hasn't raised any concerns either. Yeah.
Cite, and cite some more. I speak from a public health position, and I go straight to the literature. I make clear references so people can go back to those. I think that's the best way that I establish my expertise is one, being familiar with the literature and being able to speak about it, but also to point people who will question and challenge those perspectives.
I'll just add, I think the question is about op-ed specifically, where you as the writer have a little more jurisdiction about what gets kind of written in there, but there sometimes is an editorial process depending on the outlet. Like I've had things that have been pretty substantially altered after they've been accepted and I've published. I've had interviews that I've given where there are plenty of quotes that I never said or have been taken out of context. So I think like some of this is kind of tricky. I agree with like leaning into your scholarly expertise and citing and making good reference. And sometimes I'm writing an opinion because I have an opinion on things that it can be based in that. But I'm, I don't think the boundaries are always so clear for me, I suppose. That hasn't been a huge concern in the process of my writing. Though I think some of this can get sticky, especially now, especially what you're choosing to write about and where you're sending it. And, having something published maybe in like a, very left outlet. You'll have an audience that is different from one that is like the New York Times or the Washington Post. And that means different sorts of feedback, different sorts of scrutiny on what you're saying.
I'll just quickly say, and Luke is here, can you probably answer the legal question more, but my understanding is that we are pretty free to do these things and identify, that we are professors or faculty or what have you, as long as we don't claim to speak on behalf of the university. Right. I know that in recent years that has been constricting in some ways, and it's tied to all the other kinds of constrictions to speech we're seeing. But that is the basic principle, and I do think it's important that we keep that in mind, even with the risks that are accruing to that, given the context. I didn't mean to call on you there, Luke, but
Just have a couple more, unless there's new ones. This one I think we've answered a lot, but if anybody wanted to add anything to it, it says, what do you advise people who are not U.S. citizens as to how to participate in community action apart from monetary donations? They can't sign petitions. It's dangerous to be in the march, etc. I know that Lisa talked about there's a place for everybody to do something. You don't have to be the point person. I just wondered anybody had anything else to add to that. Yes.
I mean, so this is a great question. So thank you. And I think the risks are very real, so I remember years ago, before even things were as bad as they are, a person who's a very close friend, very dear to me, who's not a US citizen, was saying something about how, they were so horrified by what was happening with gender affirming care then, they wanted to show up and, they were going to put everything on the line. And, I was like, as a trans person, please don't do that, right? Like, there are lots of us who can show up, and please, like, I don't, I mean, obviously people have their own autonomy in terms of what they do, but this is someone who I'm in close relationship with, right? And so I think people are right to be obviously extremely, extremely cautious in this moment. Things have changed dramatically. There have been lots of sort of activist projects that I've worked on that, in the course of a few months, we pulled something offline, or, like to protect people, we've had to change things. So I think people are right to be really cautious. And at the same time, particularly if this question is coming from folks who have academic skills, right? Like, there's so much that can happen. And I think that can happen, like, if you are connecting with people, there is research that you can do behind the scenes. There are things that you can write behind the scenes. And I think one of the things that has been really good is that there is so much more awareness now of digital security. And so I think that, that's the other piece is, be really careful about how you're doing whatever work you're doing. But I think there is definitely a place and a need for everyone to lend their skill sets to all kinds of, different movements. So. Yeah.
The last question I have here is, I guess since we have folks from all three campuses, it says, to what extent is there a mechanism for interdisciplinary school or university collaboration or information sharing when it comes to activism? Or what would you like to see if there isn't? Okay.
So I want to put a plug in for the Ginsberg Center here on the Ann Arbor campus. They, if you're looking for opportunities to work with community, they can help you they can help facilitate those relationships, but they, because they have, sessions that are available to all three campuses. I have actually gone to workshops and intensives through Ginsburg Center. So I think there's that, and there's some familiarity with people that are doing this kind of work. And so maybe becoming a part of that listserv could be one thing. On the U of M Flint campus, we have TCLT. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of what the sister of that would be on the Dearborn campus, but there are spaces on our campus that do kind of help facilitate this work. I don't know of any like listserv per se, but it seems to be the same players. So like once you kind of get connected in, you start to see like similar faces, or you see the same kind of name. So you know, I think it's a lot easier than what we think. But as far as a formal channel, I would say that those were the ones that we have in place right now.
I mean, perhaps this is obvious, but I would be remiss if I didn't say, I mean, the union networks across campuses, most of the unions are across 3 campuses. The ones that aren't, we are constantly talking to each other. We work together. Those networks of collaboration are increasing in recent years. And that includes the hospital too, by the way, right? So some of the highest density of unionized employees in U of M are in the hospital, and we're talking to those folks as well. So if you have an opportunity to be in one of the campus unions, the hospital unions, and you're not, join. If you don't have an opportunity, organize, and we can help you do that. It's a great way to be in touch across campuses and the hospital as well. So.
I'm going a little on a detour, but related to the question, there's been a lot of work happening in our field across campuses, not just the University of Michigan campuses, but organizing. There's different groups, Public Health Awaken. There's another group called HPOP that I think probably is happening in different disciplines that, you know, they've brought in some amazing organizers, including some local organizers here who kind of gave some feedback of, you know, get your own house in order. So, you know, looking for ways that, again, maybe it's back to the proximity point of, you know, are there ways to engage, even if it's small in your department? I'm not saying you have to do the direct action, but, you know, I think there's, again, small things can be really powerful. And so I'm sure you're seeing things that you would like changed, and I'm sure you don't have capacity for it, but, you know, picking your battles and thinking about how to collaborate and people who are already doing the work across the campuses.
Oh, thank you. Okay, excellent. Yes, we're getting to our closing, so that's perfect timing. So I just want to say thank you to the panel for all your hard work, and we're sorry that things are so hard right now. In the 80s and 90s, we were told we were supposed to be the ones to resolve these issues. We don't want to pass it off to the class of 2036 again. We see some hope in the work folks are doing. So thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so thank you, really, all of your expertise, all of your insights. I feel honored to have been the the person moderating this. I've learned so much, and I appreciate you. And thank you for those who came in person, and thank you for those who joined us. Although we understand the weather is bad, we have chelas. And you don't. But anyway, also I want to thank my assistants here today helping me make this work, and also all of the members of the Committee for Fairness, Equity, and Inclusion. And I think that's it.